Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on managing a team and maintaining your culture while working remotely. We've got quite a few different participants joining here, so I just ask that everyone just kind of remain on mute. If you have a question or anything, just please use the chat function. We'll have some time at the end for some conversation, so please stick around for that. Again, thank you for joining. For those that don't know, my name is Chris Broughton. I'm a chartered professional in human resources and a senior professional in human resources. I'm also a senior certified professional in human resources, just a varying degree of professional designations in the human resources function. So a little bit about Upsourced HR. Basically, we partner with organizations to make better workplaces. We provide expert HR advice without the fixed cost of an HR department for organizations that can't necessarily afford that full-time HR support. We primarily focus on policies, procedures, compliance, workplace investigations, training, HR information systems, and behavior assessments. So really what we do is provide that outsourced HR support for organizations, really all across Alberta. So just some general housekeeping items I just want to touch base on. This session is being recorded and it will be shared publicly. I believe it's live on Facebook right now for anyone who follows our page there. My wife Chantel is monitoring these questions and the chat function. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat function or raise your hand, and we'll try to address them kind of as we go along. The more participation, the better. So please don't be shy. If you have a personal experience in something that you're working with right now, please feel free to share it with the group. We'll try to respect everyone's time by keeping this to an hour, but if we run over for questions, I'm available to stay longer, as well as please feel free to reach out to me directly at my email address, chris@upsourcedhr.com. I think most of you we've worked with in the past, so please feel free to reach out to me and I'll see what I can do to answer any questions you might have. So how to manage your workers remotely. Obviously, this is something that a lot of organizations are now starting to have to adapt their business practices to managing a remote workforce. And for a lot of us, this is going to be a new experience for them. I myself have been managing remote teams for about 6 years. So I understand how that works and have a lot of experience in trying to keep these people motivated and engaged, even though I'm not able to be there a lot of the time and be with them face to face. So here are some things that I've learned and some things to consider as we're going forward in this kind of this new reality and a remote workforce. So some of the things we'll be talking about is the law, trust, expectations, some different tools to use, maintaining schedules, teamwork, and communication in this remote workforce. So just some things to consider with regards to the law. Obviously, we have a couple different areas, specifically in Alberta with regards to employment standards. They cover things like hours of work, overtime, vacation, holidays. All of these employment standards still apply, even though they may not be physically at your workplace. So things like hours of work and overtime, if employees are putting in overtime, they need to be compensated for that. And so just some things to consider that we are maintaining our employment standards legislation throughout this new reality. Occupational health and safety, things like ergonomics, violence and harassment are all things that we need to be considering as employers right now in these remote workplaces. And so really we need to make sure that employees understand and that they are properly advised of their requirements under OH&S legislation, and that the company is providing them with the tools to make sure that they can do their job safely even while working remotely. We also need to consider human rights, so things like family status, people with children. We need to provide some sort of accommodation to people with children and different family status circumstances. So these are all things that we need to take into consideration when making decisions surrounding our new remote workforce. Things like religion. So if people have religious holidays, we need to make sure that we respect those, like we would probably normally do in our normal day-to-day operations. But obviously something to consider even right now as we approach Good Friday, as well as Easter Monday for different religions here in Alberta. We also need to consider physical and mental disability and the human rights legislation surrounding that. So, you know, if people have a physical disability, their home is likely accommodating that need. But certainly mental disability, we need to make sure that we are factoring those or factoring that particular condition and to the decisions surrounding accommodating that particular disability. Things like depression or other mental illnesses that could be exacerbated by this new remote work situation. Another consideration is privacy legislation. So again, we need to make sure that we are considering how information is being handled. So if your industry or if your industry or your profession requires client information to be handled a certain way, that has to be handled a certain way, even if they are in your workplace or if they are working remotely. So some things to consider with regards to the law and how this affects remote workers. So just touching base on the ergonomics, I won't go through this entire diagram, but organizations, as I mentioned, need to make sure that we're paying attention to ergonomics in the workplace. I was listening to CBC Radio last week where they had an ergonomics specialist talking about how people were submitting pictures of their workplaces and getting suggestions on how to improve it. The piano bench or the dining room table that people have now set up as their home offices aren't necessarily set up for 8 hours of continuous sitting at. So employees need to be given some tools and suggestions on how to manage that remotely, and that would be something for an organization, your health and safety experts, to start to take a look at and providing some suggestions to workers on ways to improve their own workspace at home. Just some examples, quickly pull off the internet of different work from home situations here. Obviously, in the right-hand side picture there, we can see how that bathroom or the toilet paper has now been hoarded, and why it's being hoarded is people are using it to make their sit-stand desks at home. So obviously, these things are not ideal situations, and so that's where organizations need to provide some examples on how to properly set up their workstations. So the second thing I want to talk about is trust. Really, this is kind of the foundation of a lot of remote working situations. Workers need to feel trusted from their employers and their managers to get the work done. This is the opportunity for managers to start to practice on their leadership style and provide that trust to their employees. Employees do not manage well when they feel micromanaged or if they feel under the radar. And so that's where things like, depending on what kind of check-ins you're doing with staff, we need to place that level of trust into these employees. Focus on outcomes rather than hours. So this is a little bit harder to do with things like sometimes hourly employees who are compensated on the hour, or maybe billable employees in different professions. They might be billed hourly. But again, we want to place a focus on outcomes as much as possible rather than how many hours are being put in. Traditionally, in workplaces, you were seen to be working effectively if you were at the office from 8 o'clock till 6 o'clock every day. But we need to shift that mentality to say, okay, what are we actually getting accomplished? And making sure that that is our primary focus, to make sure that the tasks and accomplishments can still be tracked efficiently that way. So the work hours might need to be adjusted. So working in the evening, starting earlier or later, depending on some of their circumstances. Working remotely might involve some give and take. And so this is kind of where we've kind of moved into a little bit more of that trust factor, that again, we're going to be having employees maybe working into the evening or earlier in the morning, depending on their own personal circumstances and what's kind of going on in their household at the time. And so we're just taking those things into consideration. So moving on to expectations, this is another big one here, is clearly defined roles and tasks. So everybody on the team needs to understand who is taking care of what. Traditionally, in a kind of brick and mortar environment, everyone kind of understood maybe who was responsible, or they could easily hear if someone was taking care of a customer, because they could actually physically see that person handling that customer. In this new remote working situation, there needs to be kind of clearly defined roles and tasks on who is going to be taking care of certain elements within your business. What you need to be doing is setting clear goals with clear deadlines and outcomes for these staff. So people need to know deadlines. So if I need this by Friday, that's clearly outlined, and that there are systems and processes in place to actually track that within your organization. As a manager, make sure that you're available for communication during the day, as well as make sure that your staff are available for communication whenever possible. Remaining professional, so things like dress code, office space, appearance, when on video calls, general communication, things like that. So these are all probably some examples that we've seen in the past couple of days or weeks of people perhaps dressing inappropriately. There was the famous bathroom Zoom meeting. And so these are all things, obviously, that people need to be reminded of, even in the workplace, as we're working with each other remotely, that there is still an expectation that the workplace is a professional workplace. Things like your appearance to clients when on video calls. I had heard this one story where this lady's home office was right next to her laundry room, and so she typically used that office space as a place to dry her clothes. And then she finally realized one day that everyone could see her clothes hanging to dry in the background. So again, just some things to consider that we need to sometimes educate our employees on, and give them a gentle reminder of making sure that we are remaining professional. Also, general communication. So a lot of us are going to be communicating in different ways right now. So a lot of it will be text-based, email-based communication. And so we just need to make sure that those still remain professional, keeping sometimes the lewd jokes and inappropriate remarks. Those need to remain off of the official organizational resources, essentially. As well as you need to be informing clients of different circumstances. So I know myself, I'm fortunate I get to work in my office, but I know a lot of people that I'm working with right now are at home with children. And so they'll often say, hey, sorry if my kid is crying in the background. These are circumstances that all of us will be encountering likely throughout dealing with different clients or customers. So be respectful of that, as well as if you are working from home, make sure that you indicate that to whoever you're speaking with. Likely they will understand what's going on and be empathetic towards your situation right now. So you also want to make sure that you're reassuring your confidentiality and privacy during this time. As I mentioned earlier, privacy and confidentiality is something that is very important to people, and we want to make sure that you're able to still provide that confidentiality and that privacy element to your customers and clients. So. I'm sure most of us have probably come up with some different tools. Just want to cover some different areas right now. So we'll kind of cover some video teleconferencing tools, some instant messaging, some collaboration, some other cloud options, and talking about some training. So obviously, as we're right now, we're using Zoom. There's Google Meet, Teams, G Suite. We've all kind of used different tools and adopted different things. So I'll just kind of go through some pros and cons of these different options. Just want to also note personal devices and internet. A lot of staff right now will likely be using maybe their home phone or their cell phones, maybe personal cell phones to making communications. So organizations should be aware of that and either be subsidizing employees' costs for the personal use, business use of personal devices, or consider getting business devices because of some certain IT policies you may have in place surrounding your own privacy policies and confidentiality agreements you may have. Just something to consider as you're moving forward with some of these tools. So most of us have, like I said, most of us have been using video or teleconference right now. Like I said, we're using Zoom. Obviously, some pros to that are some face-to-face. You actually get to see me right now. So that's very, very important to establish a level of trust as just a level of bonding between two people. You're able to gauge attention as you're able to see individuals. If you're on a telephone call or just over instant messaging, they could be doing multiple different things. So it's great to be able to see face to face and actually have that level of interaction, as well as you're able to see nonverbal cues and tone of voice. That's going to be very, very important to help gauge conversation. So sometimes if people are saying certain things, you may interpret them differently if it's done over video conference versus if it's done over some sort of instant messaging platform. You're also able to do a group conference. So again, getting a group together as a call. A lot of people are doing these different options. I myself had a group call as a team last week, and it spanned over a couple hours. Just everyone just kind of getting together and socializing more than anything. So a great opportunity to start utilizing these tools to continue to do some team bonding that way. Some of the cons of using these devices: video privacy concerns, often embarrassing moments. You know, there are certain things like I know Zoom as a platform has encountered some privacy concerns over the last couple of days or week. You know, so make sure that you are considering what type of platform you're using, if it's going to be used for confidential purposes or not. Also, meeting overload. So I'm sure lots of you have attended webinars just like this over the past couple of weeks. And so I know my wife is attending you know, multiple meetings over Zoom throughout the day. So people start to get a little bit inundated with these meeting requests. So just something to consider. Connection issues at home. Again, home internet may not be always the fastest. And then there's also the training requirements. I'm sure we've all encountered those situations where it takes at least, you know, 15, 20 minutes for a conference to start because everyone can't seem to get connected, or people are getting booted. So obviously some cons to using these type of services. Instant messaging, pros, quick conversations. So again, people are used to and are familiar with this method of communication. So it's really great for, you know, check-ins or, you know, just really, really quick communication. You can be used for group conversations, and it's just kind of very, very casual in nature. So instant messaging is something that a lot of people are becoming used to, and look for ways to integrate these type of communication tools into your remote working teams. Some of the cons, if you're using things like SMS for instant messaging, things like tracking and security can be an issue. So again, we want to make sure that we're not passing confidential information over these messaging platforms unless you're guaranteed it's secured and encrypted. Tone of voice and the message itself can be misinterpreted if you don't have a good relationship with another person. Nonverbal feedback, and it's not always timely. So you may send a message to someone and they may not see it for a couple of hours. So if it's something that's that important and crucial, pick up the phone and make sure that you're making that direct communication, so to make sure that they actually saw the message. Things like collaboration tools. So this would be things like Office 365, G Suite, Google Drive, things like that. A lot of organizations are starting to adopt these processes and tools. Access to documents remotely. So, you know, staff will have access to all of your documents, whether they're at home or in the office. They can edit these documents in real time with the team. And so it's really great to see how everyone can use these tools together. And it's relatively easy to implement. All you really need is a web browser. And then you can get people signed up to this right away. And it's a pretty easy tool to start implementing and start utilizing. Some of the cons is obviously security. Want to make sure that you lock down security on any of these type of collaboration tools, especially if you're dealing with confidential information. Managing access is very important, and the privacy legislation are things to consider. So most of the big tools, like I said, Office 365 and G Suite, have processes and security built into their system to help manage remote access as well. One thing to say about all of these different tools is that if you can enable things like two-factor authentication, that's very, very important, where employees who are signing into these systems actually have to sign in using their cell phone or some other type of fob to actually access and gain access to that system. So some of the cloud software, consider opportunities to convert or adopt processes and procedures to cloud versus paper-based. Things like expense tracking. I've talked to some organizations who have traditionally gone expense tracking where you've got to submit paper receipts, and where they're now adopting cloud-based options for expense tracking, things like time tracking, your accounting software, CRM, project tracking. These are all things that you can consider moving to a cloud-based system, which will help you manage your remote team as everyone has access to this. Deploying your IT resources to hosted or on-premise solutions, rather, can be very difficult when you're managing these remote teams. So if you can move to a cloud-based system and still maintain your security, that could be an option to consider right now. Training. This is very important because many people will be first-time users of these different tools. We've got multi-generational workforces right now where people are having to learn a lot of these new tools. Talking about the expense tracking before. People have been used to submitting their expenses a certain way for many years, and now you're adopting a new procedure. So make sure that you can have talk to those different software providers that you're working with. A lot of them will have different training options. YouTube is a great option for helping to manage training elements within for these different software options. Create software champions with your team to assist with training. I know as a millennial in the workplace, I often get tasked with helping out organization or helping my coworkers to assist them with new tools and technology, as I'm able to adopt these technologies a little bit easier than some of the other generations. So again, utilize some of your people in-house to help train your other staff members, and it's a great way to create a bond between your coworkers. And practice. Again, this is something that this is one of those tools. If you don't utilize it very often, it's something that you're not going to become very familiar with. So make sure that you, as an organization, are utilizing the tools and that you practice utilizing these tools to make sure that they become habits within your workforce. Next thing I want to focus on is maintaining schedules, finding a new work-life balance. This is really kind of what I talked about earlier. That understanding that flexibility may be needed. So some of your workforce might be early risers. Some people might be those night owls. Trying to find that balance between the work groups and your team is going to be very, very important. Making sure that, of course, that everyone can kind of work together when schedules kind of align that way. Staff should remain accessible. So again, if you have a meeting that is scheduled for 10 a.m., that is not normally a scheduled time. Try to find a time that's going to work for everyone, and make sure that everyone can attend that way. Something very important to use is your calendar. Again, different tools like Google Calendar or Microsoft Outlook. People can share their calendars with each other. So when you're actually trying to book time slots, make sure that you check each other's calendar and keep your own calendar up to date with your own appointments and schedule different times for different work. So if you want to work from something from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., make sure you put that in your calendar so that people know that you are not available at that time for that meeting. I often find that if you don't schedule those times in your calendar, people might assume that you're available and schedule a meeting for that time. So make sure that you utilize your own calendar function. Set meeting times and stick to them. So it's very important that individuals, if you have a meeting that starts at 10 a.m., make sure you start it at 10 a.m. And that you stick to your schedule. So if you're going to say it's going to be a 15-minute call, make sure you stick to that 15-minute call and respect everyone's time that way. Find a balance between work time and video conference time. So of course, this is very important. That people may not be as effective when they're on a video conference time. Just like people get meeting overloads, people can get the video conference meeting overload as well. And so make sure that you have an actual for your meeting times. Make sure you actually have a point, and make sure you focus on on getting the point across in as short a time as possible.
Just had a question come in, Chris. I shared it to you there on your screen.
Okay. Chat. Question. What if an employee is continuously not showing up to these meetings? How can we manage that? How accommodating can we really be to all the different home schedules now? So as far as what if an employee is continuously not showing up to these meetings, that's very important. Again, we were talking about the expectations earlier, about clearly defining these expectations so that if an employee has the expectation that meetings will be in their calendar and they're expected to be at it, have that conversation with them and actually address that conversation with them one-on-one and ask them why they are not attending these meetings. If they're not finding value in these meetings, address that with them and then try to take that feedback and make sure that you can find opportunities to make these meetings either more engaging or more useful to all employees. Obviously, discipline can still happen and performance, performance reviews and disciplinary procedures can still happen even while employees are working remotely. And so if someone is not meeting the expectations, you can still follow your progressive disciplinary procedure and issue things like verbal warnings, written warnings to remote workers. So make sure that they understand the expectations. Second question was, how accommodating can we really be to all the different home schedules right now? Really, it's very difficult. I understand that. It's one of those things where, like you said, if we put items into the calendar and we're all looking at who is available when, we can try to find a time that will be accommodating to these schedules. But at the end of the day, we are still employed by an organization and we still need to make sure that we are available to continue our work. And so we need, as managers and leaders, we need to make sure that we are communicating this to the staff and finding a time that will work for everyone. So thank you for those questions. Getting back to maintaining the schedules, really this is all about, looking out for signs of burnout. This will be very, very important, as some people may view this as an opportunity to, they really want to show the organization what they can do. So we want to make sure that we are looking for signs of burnout. So we could be looking at decreased communication or perhaps increased communication. So they're increasing, their communication might be happening all times of the day. You might be getting emails at 3 a.m. You may want to have a conversation with that employee about making sure that they can have a work-life balance, even though they are working from home. We want to make sure that their home does not become their workplace necessarily all the time. We want to make sure that we're looking for decreased performance. I think most people will have a certain element of decreased performance as they transition, but eventually people will be getting into somewhat of a groove. So if you do start to notice someone slipping on meeting their deadlines, make sure to take a look out for that and address that with them as soon as possible. Being forgetful, so if they're missing deadlines, if they are just forgetting certain things that are happening, again, something to look out for that burnout. And they also might become short-tempered with people or decrease their socialization altogether. So these are all just some signs of burnout that we as leaders must be looking for in our groups. Just had a different question come in. Am I living at work or working where I live? Certainly a good question. Really, it's, we are working where we live right now. You're not living at work. And so you need to make sure that we are making sure that there is a separation between the two. A lot of people who have been working from home for many, many years have set up routines in their lives, just like they would normally get together, get up in the morning, have a shower, shave, eat breakfast, and then go to work. They do the same thing when they're at home. They have a home office. They go into their home office, they shut the door, and they're essentially at work during that time. So make sure that we have that separation between our home and our work whenever possible. Teamwork is going to be very important. I had another comment come in here as well. Someone mentioned, not scheduling meetings during lunch or break times. Again, that'll be very, very important. So if you can, make sure that you respect people's lunch times. I know even when scheduling this particular session here, I thought about when would be the best time to do it, and a lot of comments I had from different people, was that lunchtime was not preferable because they wanted to have either time with their spouse, time with their kids, to actually have a break from work. So I think that's very important as organizations too, to consider that, try not to schedule these sessions over the lunchtime, or just over a break. Allow people to get up and move a little bit. Some teamwork, focusing on that. Staff may be used to getting updates from team members. So again, team-based environments are very, very important. In brick and mortar environments, they may be having that collaboration where they're getting updates, even if they're in a shared office space. They might be having communication throughout the day. So trying to set up tools where team members can continue to get those updates throughout the day. Like I said, use tools like instant messaging tools, Slack, or Hangouts chats, or things like that staff can still use to communicate and keep people up to date. Encourage team check-ins and celebrate wins. There's different software out there, whether it be project management software, or even certain HR software, where people can celebrate different career wins or project wins. So making sure that we have those tools in place where people can still maintain that level of communication with their teams. Also utilize tools to help keep teams up to date and on track. So I myself use a software called Zoho Projects, where I can keep all the different projects up to date and make sure that the people that I'm working with on different projects are kept up to date on the status. There's chat function built into that project software. There's milestones, there's timesheets. Everything is kind of built into a project management software. So I think it's very, very important that organizations provide employees the tools to help continue with certain projects in the workplace. Something like, again, status updates on where things are at with projects is very, very important, as well as workflows. So workflows are something that traditionally have happened sometimes just out of habit, or just they've kind of grown organically. So if I'm done with this piece of paper, I'm going to go take it to this person who does something with it, who then takes it to that person who does something with it, and eventually that process is completed. Right now, there are a lot of great tools to use to manage these workflows digitally. And so you can start to build these processes where, again, if you have a particular piece of paper and it needs to go to this person, you can then build it into an automated workflow where, as soon as I'm done with that piece of paper or that process, what I can do is then it automatically gets sent to that next person who gets a notification of it, and it continues that whole process. So look for opportunities to introduce some of these workflows tools into your workforce, because I know myself, I've really valued how much time and automation has just, I guess, simplified the process overall. Communicating with your staff, begin with daily check-ins. So it's very, very important as leaders to start doing some daily check-ins, even though you may not have been communicating with your staff on a daily basis before. It's good, at least in the beginning, to do these daily check-ins. Make sure that they have what they need to do their job, and that they have what they need to make that transition from a brick and mortar environment to a remote working environment. So make sure as leaders and organizations can provide the tools and that they make sure that they know what they should be doing during this time. Over time, maybe move to a more natural check-in schedule. So if you, as a leader, used to check in with your staff on a weekly basis, if they have a lot of autonomy, maybe move to that regular check-in schedule as the remote working continues. Understand that information will not flow as easily as in person in the beginning. So again, providing these tools to your teams to increase the flow of communication will make sure that nothing gets missed. Make meetings purposeful. So as I mentioned before, if there's a purpose to the meeting, make sure that we get to that point. Make sure that someone is actually facilitating the meetings to make sure that we stay on point. If you can, maybe consider walking meetings if possible. These are great opportunities for people to stand up and maybe go for a walk. These might be more of your casual meetings or casual check-ins. But it's an opportunity for, like I said, for people to get up, walk, stretch their legs, and just kind of get away from their computer screens maybe for a minute. Avoid emails overall. Like I said, there are lots of different tools out there. Emails are somewhat of an older way of communicating, especially in a remote working environment. Things like IM, tasks lists, or instant messengers, task lists, project updates are all different ways that we can kind of stop the flow of the email communication. No one likes to get to their desk in the morning and see that they have 100 unread emails, when some of these things can be handled in different ways. So just want to move on to maintaining your culture. I hope that previous section on managing some of your team remotely gave you some different strategies on how you can use different tools and actually start thinking about transitioning to a remote workforce. But obviously maintaining your culture that you've invested so much into, and it really is an important part of your organization, doesn't slow down during this time, and that when things do return to normal, that your culture doesn't really skip a beat at all. People are able to return to your culture, and it has still maintained those values that you have worked so hard in implementing in your organizations. So just some questions to begin. Start thinking about, what are your organization's values? What traditions do you have? What does your team expect? What do your customers expect? And are you currently working in a hybrid mode, some remote and some not? So I'll just kind of go through some of these questions a little bit. So what are your organization's values? I've done a session earlier this year on culture in organizations and talked a lot about values in particular, but I'll touch base on this briefly here. Basically, values form the base of your culture, and anyone who's kind of purposely built cultures understands that these values are very important to build off of, and helps build traditions, builds processes and procedures into the organization. A lot of organizations kind of grow, organizational culture grows organically. So over time, values start to form within the organization. So this might be a time to start thinking about what those values are, and start thinking about ways that you can embrace the values that have kind of grown organically, how you can embrace those values currently, right now. So ensure your decisions are backed up by your values. Do you value trust, relationships, family? Right now is the time that you can really cement those value statements into your decisions, and cement those into your culture. Some organizations who say that they value family but aren't willing to accommodate a work-life balance right now, you're kind of sending the wrong signal to your employees if you value family but are not willing to accommodate right now. So again, this is something that you want to make sure that you are thinking about as you're going through these decisions. Take this opportunity to remind or re-educate your staff on the values that are currently that you currently have as an organization. So some people, maybe one of those things where it sits on the wall, you've got your value statement, but really it's something that you may cover on their first day, but you haven't covered it in 6 years. This is an opportunity to send out a statement as a leader, as the owner, as the manager, whatever it might be. Send out a statement to your staff about re-educating them and reminding them of the values of the organization. What traditions do you have? Do you have Monday meetings, casual Fridays? These are all things that you can continue to do even throughout this time. I know a lot of organizations have, or Google in particular has something called they call it TGIF, where they have a large group meeting, and anyone can ask anything. These are traditions that you can continue even in a remote working environment. Do groups get together for drinks after work? Do people get together and socialize over the water cooler about different things? These are all conversations that should be encouraged during this time to maintain that social bond. And so again, giving them the tools to actually continue with these conversations is very, very important. Do you do things like celebrate birthdays? Do you celebrate work anniversaries? Make sure that we are continuing those traditions, because I think it's very, very important that we maintain some sort of normalcy throughout this time. And make sure that the employees know that you still value these traditions and look for opportunities to continue them. Like I said, it's very, very important that we continue with some level of normalcy as we transition into a remote working environment. What does your team expect? Did you do regular check-ins before? Do you have an open door policy? And how did you manage these interruptions? So again, if a lot of owners, managers, leaders had an open door policy, hey, come see me anytime if you have any questions. Make sure that you're still available for employees to be able to do that. It might look a little different. It might look like an instant message to say, hey, are you available right now? You can respond yes, or hey, no, give me 15 minutes, and make sure that you still honor that tradition of giving them the open door policy. Something like, do you provide lunch every Friday? Was there a certain event planned? I know some organizations are trying to get skip the dishes or different food delivery services to different remote working employees to, first of all, support local restaurants and local businesses, but also remind employees that that you as an organization still care about them, and that you're still continuing some of those traditions I talked about earlier. Consider getting your team company swag. So, if you want to get a upsourced HR hoodie and get your team working with, just some different apparel or, even a mouse pad for that matter. I don't know if anyone still uses mouse pads, but, different things that kind of remind them that they're still part of the team, even though they might be working from home. I think it's very important that people still have an attachment to your culture, to your brand. Share successes that they might be missing. So again, as an organization, brick and mortar environments, you might be getting environments where, big sales, new projects, pictures from work sites were all kind of shared, at the workplace, maybe at a bulletin board where you can post announcements. Look for opportunities where you can continue to share some big announcements or news, but doing it in a remote working environment. And then monitor employee feedback. This is important, that we continue with our employee satisfaction surveys, that we continue to gather feedback from employees on how things are working and how engaged they are in the workplace. So look for opportunities to implement some of those surveys or procedures into a remote working environment as well. What do your customers expect? Obviously, this is very important, as our customers' expectations might have changed or they might remain the same. Are your staff more casual or do they act more professional? Maintain those customers' expectations. And so it's important that, employees who are showing up to business meetings through teleconference or video conference rather, are not showing up in a t-shirt. Make sure that they are showing up in professional business attire if that's what your customers expect. Maintain the same level of service delivered in the same fashion. So whenever possible, we want to make sure that we can continue to deliver the best customer service possible. Make a point here, if your business is closed to the public, look for new opportunities to service your customers. I know a lot of organizations are doing curbside delivery for different products. If they're doing a retail type of operation, people can set up online shops, but look for making sure that your customers are still being maintained in the same level that they were before. And again, make sure that we can monitor our customer satisfaction through surveys as well. So this will help us make sure that we can maintain the culture, make sure that nothing is changing. We don't want to skip a beat when it comes to our customer satisfaction. And so making sure that we can continuously engage our customers in satisfaction surveys. They don't have to be very long, 2 or 3 questions long, but we're gathering feedback on the level of service. Even question like, our workforce is now working remotely. We want to make sure that you receive the same level of service. Were you pleased or overall satisfied with your service today? Just some simple tools that we can start to implement to make sure that we are maintaining our customers the same way. And then hybrid mode. This is something that's maybe more difficult for organizations who have some working remotely and some not. We want to make sure that we can maintain the culture for everyone all together. Ensure that remote staff are connected. So again, making sure that they have the tools that they would in the workplace or in the brick and mortar workplace versus what they have in the remote workspace as well. So making sure that they have the same tools available to them if they're in the office or not. encourage the use of communication to ensure that everyone is up to date. So again, traditionally, if your workplace has traditions of people engaging in face-to-face communication, that might feel the remote work group feeling left out. So make sure that we're embracing the use of communication tools whenever possible to make sure that everyone is in the loop. Use video. I've attended lots of different video conference sessions where a lot of people will have their cameras off for some reason. I know people are probably pretty shy, but obviously in a workplace, everyone is being able to see each other face to face. We get that nonverbal feedback. We get that bond of seeing each other. So it's a good that whenever possible that we use video to actually see each other face to face. This will be very important for, especially in the hybrid mode, where people are going to be seeing each other face to face, but then there's now this voice on the other end of a line rather than a face. So make sure that we use video and encourage the use of video whenever possible. Oh, we had a question come in. Do you think we should include the temporary laid off people in meetings, or are we allowed? Good question. So this is obviously in workplaces who may have had to temporarily lay off staff. If we should include them in meetings, I think it's important to still keep any temporary laid off employees engaged in the workplace, that they may not be involved in meetings, with day-to-day meetings. But if you do have casual meetings or casual get-togethers with groups, I think it's still important that you invite them and try to keep them engaged in the workplace as much as possible. It's especially important if you plan on bringing these employees back, because I think it'll keep them engaged in the workplace. So yes, if you have the option and the employees or the temporarily laid off employees want to attend, certainly invite them and keep them engaged in the workplace. So good question. Thank you. Sorry, and team meetings should be facilitated to encourage input from remote staff. I've attended some meetings in a hybrid environment in the past where everyone in the actual physical room is engaging in a conversation, and there's 3 to 4 people who are attending either on the phone or through video conference, and you don't hear anything from them. So it's important that whoever's leading the meeting help facilitate the conversation by engaging input from the people that are remote working. So this is very, very important to make sure that everyone kind of has an input and that everyone feels engaged in the conversations. Otherwise, you'll end up in situations like I mentioned earlier, where people just stop attending meetings because they just don't feel like they're participating at all, and it's a waste of time. So make sure someone is facilitating that meeting and engaging that input from everyone who is attending. So that was about it. I appreciate everyone attending. I understand that these are difficult times right now. By all means, if everyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email address is chris@upsourcedhr.com. My number is 403-694-0240. By all means, go to our website, upsourcedhr.com, and you can certainly engage with me there. I will be sticking around for the next couple of minutes in case anyone has any questions or any input. If you'd like to speak to me one-on-one, or certainly have, we can engage in a video chat right now if you'd like. So, but again, thank you for attending, and I hope everyone is doing well.
Thanks, Chris. Didn't you watch Council on?